Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to today's webinar, Leading the Unleadable, How to Manage Mavericks, Cynics, Divas, and Other Difficult People with Alan Willett from our Career Accelerator webinar series. My name is Scott Levine, and I am the membership manager here at the IEEE Computer Society. In each month, we host a webinar on vital business skills that help you excel at your current job and be helpful throughout your career. Before we get started, I'd like to address some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email tomorrow which will include the slides as well as the recording. You can ask any questions in the Q&A box you see on your screen. If possible, please reference the slide your question refers to. Alan will answer as many questions as he can following the presentation. Control freaks, narcissists, slackers, cynics, their outbursts, irrational demands, gripes, and countless others are disruptions that need to be dealt with. This webinar provides insight on how to run this seemingly difficult chore into a straightforward process that gently yet effectively improves behaviors. In today's presentation, Alan will explain how to master the necessary mindset, explain the problem calmly in a short feedback session, get a commitment to change, then follow up, coach others to replicate the process, and develop the situational awareness required to spot future troubles before it hits. Today's speaker, Alan Willett, is an expert consultant, speaker, and award-winning author of Leading the Unleadable, How to Manage Cynics, Divas, and Other Difficult People with Lead with Speed. Alan is the founder and chief engineer of Exceptional Difference, LLC, a consultancy that elevates engineers, leaders, and organizations to world-class performance. Alan works with clients around the world, including in the United States, the UK, Turkey, South Africa, China, India, Canada, and Mexico. Alan's passionate work on leadership with a laser focus on the unique challenges of leading in the elevated pressure environments of high technology developments. Alan has consulted to HP, Oracle, Microsoft, NASA, General Motors, Intuit, Audible, ATK, OnStar, Cornell University, and Rutgers, just to name a few. Alan, thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
A pleasure to be here. So, wish I could see everybody. Wow, we have about 97 attendees so far. This will be fun. So the question is, have you ever had to work with a difficult person? Have you had to work for a difficult person? Have you had one work for you? Really, these challenges are just across the board. I've had the opportunity, as Scott mentioned, to do this around the world. Turkey, South Africa, China, India, United States, and all over. And through all this, we get to gather stories from around the campfire. And folks are really welcome to put some of their own stories in the chat. I would love to hear from you of what difficulties you faced. I'm going to start with 3 simple stories that are going to be threaded through this talk. One is there's this team that had what I would call a caustic cynic. And whenever a good idea came up, or even a bad idea, he was just there as a zinger. Well, somebody tried that 12 years ago, and that went over like a lead balloon, except a lot more funny. He was very funny. Everything he said was really good, biting, funny, and it just popped whatever idea. It just shut people down. And the team leader was very frustrated about it, because every meeting, something where that guy just had that biting remark that just sort of ended conversations. Everybody laughed, but nobody was going to be brave enough to bring something up. Nobody wanted to face his barbed wit. So let's set that one aside. What's that team leader going to do? Another one, there was a yeller. By the way, I was in the organization when I saw this. He was actually worked for the president of this division. And I came in and for the first day, and I saw these people running down the hallways. They were all running away from this one guy, because as I went down the hallway, I came in and I glanced and I saw this poor young engineer being berated by this really tall, powerful man. And he had this deep baritone voice and saying, "That is not acceptable in any way," except he did a lot louder, a lot meaner. So I walked into the CIO later that, the president later that day, and the president said, I said, "Hey, do you have a problem with this one guy?" And he goes, "How did you know? You've only been here for a day." And I said, I had a clue. So we talked about what to do in that situation as well. So that situation one, the caustic cynic. Situation two, the yeller. And the yeller, by the way, was going to be a problem because people were thinking of quitting because of the yeller. We'll come back to that. And then the third situation is this really brilliant architect, engineer, software developer. There was a critical build happening over the weekend. And he came over on the weekend. The launch of the product was coming up in less than a week. He came over the weekend to implement a change that he thought would be brilliantly beautiful for the whole release. And it broke the entire build, and they missed their date to launch the product. So this guy broke the build. He thought he had the best idea, and it really was disruptive for the whole organization. So each of these team leaders had really different kind of problems to face. And I'm going to come back to each of these. We're going to talk about that and the personality types and the challenge it is for leaders to deal with this or teammates to deal with this. In the last case, the person that broke the build, that was the 10 years ago, that person was the college roommate of the current manager of that group. Very difficult. They were best friends. Very difficult situation. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to hit a few things. First of all, we want to talk about what the gifts the Unleadable bring, because we got to be clear. The Unleadable, I'll get there. Then we're going to talk about the trouble gauge. We're going to talk about leadership obligations. Trouble gauge is, how do you judge a trouble? Then leadership obligations. What is your responsibility as a leader or as a teammate? What is your responsibility for removing or improving the person from the situation? We're going to talk about how that's really a rheostat. There's a lot of clicks in between remove or improve. We'll talk about that. Then we're going to get to one of the most important elements, chapter 5 in the book, which somebody so graciously put a nice review on the chat. Remove or giving feedback is chapter 5 of that book, and it's one of the most requested ones. How do you give feedback that leads to a positive difference and also protects you as the person delivering it, so you leave feeling good about yourself as too? Then we're going to talk about how you follow through, and the really key is the difference between good leaders and exceptional leaders. So please feel free to put your stories or questions in as we go along. First off, let's talk about the gifts the Unleadable bring. Keep in mind, 90% or more of the unleadable, difficult people I've had to work with personally, or I've helped team leaders and executives deal with, are often brilliant. They really have some of the best, smart, passionate ideas possible. They really want to do good for the organizations. Mavericks. Mavericks are people that are never satisfied with the status quo. They want to make things better. And you're going to find out the yeller was a maverick. He was not satisfied. That was what was not acceptable. He was really pushing to make things better. Mavericks can go across the red line when they don't respect the previous history, when they don't respect how an organization got where they are now and why the processes exist the way they do. Of course they can do better. Show some respect and help build upon the history that is there. And maybe you'll learn a thing or two about why they got there in the first place. Cynics. Oh my gosh. I need cynics in my life because I'm an optimist. I really believe that things are going to be good. And when I come up with an idea, I think it's going to be brilliant and work perfectly. I need cynics because they are brilliant at pointing out the risks that need to be known, need to be addressed. When they cross a red line to be trouble is when they start shutting down the ideas, like the caustic cynic was doing. Divas are obsessed, really obsessed to make sure everything about their project is organized to perfection. I expect people out in the audience have heard about the bands that required that there was no like brown M&Ms. They would want a bowl of M&Ms on the table when they got to their hotel room when they're traveling. These are some of the best bands. I forget if it was Rolling Stones or Bon Jovi, one of those. And they want to know about brown M&Ms. It was in their contract. It was nearly the small print. But when they got there and they found no M&Ms, or they found there was brown M&Ms in the bowl, they knew that the people that were dealing with the contract weren't reading the details. And that meant that there might be a problem with the sound system. And they would go make sure. And they had data for this. They had correlation and significance. When people missed the M&Ms, they screwed up the sound system. They had very exact standards. They wanted that. Perfectionists are good. They make their projects very successful. Where they cross the red line is when they think they know best for everyone, like the guy that broke the build, or when they don't understand that there's other projects and other responsibilities, and you have to make all the projects be in a winning situation. Diversity is important. Diversity is throughout nature. We need all the personality types. You need these people. And that's what makes it so exciting about diversity. And diversity also causes friction. So what we're going to now is how to figure out what to do and when to do it. Oh, thank you. The band was Van Halen. I knew somebody would know out there. I appreciate that, Richard. The trouble gauge. What this is for is really, it's a little bit of self-therapy for you. What is the problem? And how often is it occurring? And it helps you judge what the next steps you have to take is. You know, there's another person I was working with where there was somebody that was just kind of Samson just asked, how often do you see all of that in the same person? It does happen that you get it all in the same person. I'll just tell you the 3 stories I have here. They were all independently had that unique trait, just that trait alone. But I have had people that were absolutely a cynic, a diva, and a maverick, and they were very challenging to deal with. But again, I want to be clear. The big thing I've noticed is almost every time people have the right intentions for the organization, they want to do good for the team, for the group. They somehow are unaware of the damage they're doing around them. And we'll come back to that, Seth, about what happens when your lead is the problem. So make sure you remind me. So when you're thinking about this, I really want to look at the troublesome people you have. And if you have troublesome people, try to sketch this out right now and just write this in. By the way, I look at no friction is sometimes an issue too. If somebody isn't causing any friction, are they really engaged? Because we want engagement, we want energy. This is where we want to be. But when you look at things, one of the people I was working with, they were kind of constantly annoying and once in a while disruptive, but never destructive. So that needs dealing with, but it's different. If you look at our problem people, for example, the caustic cynic really fit in this category. Just constantly annoying and a little bit disruptive, but it wasn't really destructive. What do I mean by destructive? Let's go to the other one. The destructive, the yeller, was definitely disruptive. But it was going toward this. It was going toward destructive. Because people were starting to line up outside the president of the division's office saying, hey, get rid of this guy or we quit. We're out of here. That's destructive. So this was getting to be a big problem. And that really would have been expensive and sad making for everybody involved. So really, they really had to think about how to deal with this. So there's annoying guy, disruptive and destructive. And then there's broke the build. This one was interesting because in general, this person was really energizing for people. Really wasn't annoying or disruptive. But this was a big deal break. And we'll come back to this. So this was definitely destructive. It hurt not just the team and the team members, but it hurt the whole organization. The delay of the launch cost them sales. It cost them revenue. It was a big deal. So this was another one that they really had to look hard at. So what I encourage, oh yes, and Julie just added, this is useful. It's really too easy to confuse the annoying or really annoying with the destructive. And that's what we have found. When people do this chart, they start to chill out a little bit and think about better how to deal with this. It helps you get your own emotions under control. So everybody should check in with themselves. How often have you had disruptive people around you, even destructive, and what has your reaction been? And these are the reactions we often see. When you see these things occurring, some people just choose to ignore it. Some people just want to complain about it. Oh, I can't believe this person has done this again. Some people say, hey, it will get better. That's easy. Some people just say, oh, that's how that person is. You know, we have a lot of people like that. Just let it be. The gambler, you know, maybe it's actually helping the team. Or just plain panic, which is, you know, lashing out immediately, which doesn't help the situation. So we really want to just really think about what our reactions are to this. What we need to do is to really embrace our obligations as a leader. And I want to take a pause for a minute here and just say, in my experience, we all are leaders, even if we don't have people management resources, etc. If you're a member of a team and you see this happening, you do have a responsibility. If you're the team leader, you have an even higher responsibility. If you're the manager, leader of leaders, you have more responsibility. When you see this happening, there is a responsibility to act. And here's a framework for thinking about how to act. There's two parts to the leadership obligation I want to talk about. The mission, the group, the individuals, you. First and foremost, always must come the mission. What is your organization about? What is your team about? What are they doing for the customers? What are they doing for the group? What are they doing for the company? What's the mission? In the case of the person that broke the build, this was a critical, really major update. So I would really like people to really think about what the mission of was that for that. The update was, by the way, there was technical debt in that organization. It was amazing. The technical debt was just making it so it was really hard to put in new features and try to really bring in the best of what's going on. For example, they really wanted to like just change one of the formats and features of this software thing, and it took them over 2 months to do it. They had finally gotten the technical debt replaced, and they were able to make changes like that in a day. But they needed to do the major release to get out to the field. And now the build broke it. It got in the way of the whole mission of the group. And we have a responsibility to the group, and then we have a responsibility to the individuals. So when you look at this, we got to think, can we help the individual improve while improving the group, while helping with the mission? That's what the team leader always has to look at. For the obligations of engineering, this is from the Exceptional Engineering Experience. This is a 6-month mentorship program we have, a little bit like training, a little bit like mentorship, a lot about transformation. And what we talk about here is that the focus on value to the customers and organization first and foremost. That's, again, the mission part. The next is high quality products and services. We want the things to work. We want people to really take ownership of speed to value, which is what is the best way to get there, and to make commitments you meet, can keep or beat. And underneath that all is data. And this is a framework we're going to look at when we talk about giving feedback. So we got to make sure we have the obligations of engineering, and we got to make sure that we have the obligations of the group. So now when we look at the people, we have to make a judgment of what to do. And this rubric here is very useful. I was working with a CTO of one organization. They wanted to do a launch of a major new initiative. And they were very excited about this. But I noticed hesitation. They weren't sure what to do next. And when I saw that hesitation, I started to ask some questions. So what it turned out is he wasn't comfortable with the person that was going to be leading the initiative. So the CTO, of course, was sponsoring it, was putting a couple $1 million of investment in and really wanted this to go well. And he was troubled. So on the spot, we came up with this rubric for him to go think about. And this is what he was thinking about. Has this person had the ability to take feedback and improve? Very important attribute. We'll come back to that. Is the person well loved in the organization? How disruptive will it be to remove them or to keep them? Either one is going to be a challenge. How good are they at collaborating? Because our environments really call for highly collaborative skills. And this is important, the skills and experience versus the needs of the project. How vital are they to the future of the company? And finally, if removed, is it hard to replace them? Or is that fairly easy? So if you look at this, the person came away in the next day and he said it was clear that he had to get a different person to lead this project. The person wasn't able to take feedback, wasn't well loved, and they really didn't need, it was just across the board. He realized what he had to do. So let's come back. The caustic cynic. When the leader started to fill this out, this person had been through the exceptional engineering experience, by the way. And the first question he asked himself when he was looking at this, he said, well, I never gave the person feedback, so I don't know. The person is liked, is collaborative. We need his skills. As he's filling this out, then he thought about it. He went back to this first one. He said, you know what? I never gave him feedback about this. I really haven't given him feedback about anything. This is my problem. And as he thought about it more, he realized that he was the leader of those meetings and he was allowing the behavior to take place. He didn't stop the caustic behavior from happening. Every time the cynic did something, he either just ignored it or laughed along with it. He allowed it to happen, even though it frustrated the heck out of him. So he decided he just needed to change how he led meetings and set expectations. He decided he was also going to give feedback to the person, but it was just in the annoying category, and it was not something critical. The remove or improve discussion was just not necessary for him. The yeller. Oh my gosh. This one was so interesting because, again, this was heading toward very destructive. It wasn't there yet, but it was very disruptive. Was the person able to take feedback? When I talked to the division president, yeah, pretty good. He took feedback, he made changes. He always seemed to take the feedback well. Was he well loved? Well, this one was split. There was some people over here, and there was some people over here. His collaboration skills were sort of in the middle. Sometimes he did well, and sometimes he didn't. Did they need this person? Yes. Actually, this person had vital, difficult skills. They needed to bring him here. And if it would be difficult to acquire a new person, it would. So the challenge the president faced is, how do we keep this person? And in keeping them, how do we keep them in a way that actually makes the rest of the group better? That keeping them doesn't lead to more destruction. So we'll come back to this when we talk about giving feedback. And finally, I just want to talk about the person that broke the build. The person that broke the build, when the team leader looked at this, he realized a few things. He had given feedback to this person multiple times before, and he actually told them that he was really clear. He was worried about this person breaking the build. And he said that he wanted to make sure that he understood that the thing was frozen. And so once again, it happened off the chart. Did not take feedback. In my opinion, he didn't have to fill out anymore. It became clear at that point with the destruction, etc. But he went farther. He found out this was a similar split. Very charismatic guy, and well-loved and well-hated both across the board. His collaboration skills were negative. They absolutely needed his skills and experience. But they needed it for this release. In the future, after this was done, that wasn't so much needed, and they could replace him. So this one really weighted on this side. So I want to be clear. When you have a disruptive or destructive person, sometimes you really have to make the decision to remove. Now, in Chapter 9 of the Unleadable, you're going to see there's a lot of clicks on the wheel. And what they did for this person, who was a really very brilliant software engineer, and in this organization, it was very, very difficult to actually fire somebody from the organization, but it was easy to move them to a different position. And it was clear they had to do this. And it was clear, even though this person was this guy's college roommate and one of his best friends, this had to happen because it was really devastating for a lot of reasons and a lot of people. They moved him into the test organization. Now, testing is a noble activity and noble career. But as somebody that thought he was the most brilliant architect ever, most brilliant engineer, builder ever, they moved him into testing and they removed all his privileges for making changes to the code. They thought that was the only safe way to proceed. And the person chose to leave the organization, and 2 years later, he actually asked to come back. So they did do the feedback very well with him and explained why they had to do that and why it was important to the team and the organization. So here comes the hard part. I find one of the hardest things is once you accept reality that it's your responsibility to do something, that you have to really become the calm center of leading change. Really, we can't live in the denial or panic or other things. We really got to accept the reality. And so I'm going to talk to you about the steps to accepting the reality, getting calm so you can actually deliver the feedback. Oh, I really love the interactive version of this. I would love to hear people. Have people had to do this before? Give feedback and what the kind of knot in your stomach you have? This becomes easy with practice. I've coached a number of people on this, and people say that the first time they did this, it took them a full day to get through this. Some people a couple days. And later on, it becomes almost natural and you get through it in a few minutes. The first is to be aware of your feelings. The caustic cynic, the team leader, became really aware of his feelings where it's me. I'm being the jerk here. I'm not taking care of this. And he was upset that it was shutting down ideas. He was upset about the impact it was having. And he really knew that he could make a change. The yeller, the division president, he was angry. He was angry because this was being so destructive potentially to his organization. People that he had personally mentored and grown in the organization were threatening to leave. This was very difficult. And he also knew at the same time he needed this person. He needed this person because they brought a special set of skills to take this organization to the next level. He had a experience in the competence they needed that they did not have. He had experience in leading larger organizations, which the division president didn't have, and they were growing by an order of magnitude. So he felt very passionately about this, and the main thing he felt was really anger. And he really thought about this, and he had to take his anger and figure out why it was so important. And that's when he looked at the obligations of engineering. He realized there's a few things that were being impacted. One is it would very much impact the ability for the organization to achieve its mission. And he thought of his leadership obligations to the overall group. And he wanted to give this person the chance to do this. So removing judgment, he realized he wanted to give feedback to the person to find out what was going on for him. And his goal was initial goal for the feedback was that simple. I want to understand if this person sees a problem, and I want to understand where he's coming from. And then the final step is to prepare feedback that's less than 2 minutes. The reason that's important is you want to have room to listen. And I'm going to give a couple different examples of that. So when you give feedback, you want to give your feedback, you want to set up time. First and foremost, you want to set up time and make there ample time available. Make sure you're not going to be interrupted, and make sure the person's prepared. I also encourage you to consider doing this on a Friday so the person has time to think about it over the weekend. So give the feedback in 2 minutes or less. Stop talking, listen some more, give time for the person to think, and at the end, schedule the next session. So with the caustic cynic, the person did sit the caustic cynic down and said, hey, I think this problem is mostly me. But have you noticed that whenever there's an interesting idea come up, you tend to shut down the whole conversation? Have you noticed what's going on for you? The caustic cynic sat there for a few minutes without talking and said, I see what you're saying. Do you have suggestions? Because this is how I am. This is what I do. And he was very open about it. He said, I don't know how to stop. And he said, I'm going to give you opportunities. The leader said, we're going to make sure that the meeting's set up so you have a chance to give your feedback on the ideas. And you can make it funny too, but let's give people get all the ideas on the table first. And then you can give what the negative parts are, and we can work on how to make the ideas better. And they made a compact on how to do that. And the meetings immediately got better. And he was still able to get his funny comments in, but they were no longer caustic. They were funny and building and helping to make the ideas better. The other part was the yeller. This was a hard one. So I coached the division president. I said, you will have to remove him if he doesn't want to improve. So the first thing you got to find out is, does he want to fix this? Does he want to improve? So that was really his goal for the meeting. So the president sat down with this really large guy, big, tall man, deep voice. By the way, he was ex-military. He was like equivalent of a sergeant in his ranks. And he just brought that attitude with him. And the division president sat down and said, look, I love 90% of what you're doing, but I want you to be aware there's people that want to quit the organization because of how they perceive you yell at them. And I've seen it. It looks to me like you're yelling at them too. And I want to know what's going on for you. It was that simple, that short and sweet. And the guy started to get upset. He really was upset. He said, but there's things that have to be changed or we're going to go out of business. This is so critical. And these young people, they need to understand how difficult it is and that they have to take on this responsibility. And you could tell the guy was channeling that when he had to lead people into actual fights in the army, into war, and how important it was to bring people up to the standard that was important to survive. And so the president started to say, hey, how does this relate to your military experience? And they started to have discussion. And he said, I see you care deeply about your people. What I want you to think about is, how do they know that you care about them? And how can you help get them better without the yelling part? Are you willing to work on that? And they decided to talk on a Monday, and they came back to do so. And when they came back to do so, this yeller guy said, I want to work on it, but I need help. And they actually set up support for him to get, they actually hired me to help coach him on alternative ways to raise the bar for people. And one of the measures for success the CEO, the president set up was to get people lined up outside the yeller's office instead of his own office, because before they were lining up to complain about the guy, he wanted them to line up to get advice from that person. And that is actually what happened. Now, there's a good comment that came in. Friday is commonly associated with termination of employment, however. This is true. And if you're in the kind of organization where layoffs have been happening, I think you should avoid that. Most of the organizations I was in where we did the Friday, layoffs were unheard of or rare. So that really wasn't a cultural fear. So be aware of your context, I think, is the message that came up. I really appreciate that. I got to tell you, it's so important, this part is, for giving the feedback in this soft, gentle way. One of the people I worked with, there was somebody on their team that was constantly missing commitments. And they hadn't done that before. They looked at the history, the record, and they sat down with them and said, basically, just very simply, I'm really worried about you. You've been missing commitments. You've never done that before. What's going on? And the person revealed that he was having a divorce and he was trying to keep that secret and was really affecting his work. And he immediately went and apologized to the team and got support. And they were able to really recover all the commitments. The team leader and that person really used that opportunity to make the whole team more of a gelled team better. This ability to be able to see the reality of the situation with the Unleadable, to understand where they are in the trouble gauge, to understand what your obligation is, whether you have to remove them, improve them, and how to actually make the groups better. This is our challenge. Now, the other obligation of leadership is really to follow through. Follow through is always critical. I played a lot of sports and I coached some sports too. If you watch great tennis players, the rookies tend to stop when they hit the ball, but the great ones, really great follow through. Great basketball players, great follow through. For a leader, to make these changes happen, once you set these expectations in place, once you do the feedback, it's important to follow through. So, what's interesting is follow through is really important, and sometimes you have to build a whole support system to do that. So the yeller actually had a problem. There were some hot spots he had that if you poked him, people would yell. That he would yell if you poked him in the right time, right place. And he was trying to do this in secret. So when somebody would bring up that hot spot and he was trying not to yell anymore and try to handle it better, the whole group would just sort of hold their breath and they would poke him until that happened, because that released the tension. He had to actually come out publicly and say, I'm really working on this and I need the whole group's help. This is what I'm trying to do. And this really was an amazing thing for him to say. And people, of course, wanted to help him. So they worked out a plan for his people in his critical network to really help him get to the place he wanted to be. That was part of the follow-through system they put up in place. For the person that broke the build, if you want to look backwards, that team leader had missed multiple opportunities before to stop that behavior. Where I noted before, he gave feedback multiple times. He told this person to do things differently, and the person didn't do it. And he allowed the person to get away with it. So the person that came in, when he came in over the weekend, he thought it was just business as usual, when he could have been given that feedback much earlier. That could have been prevented. So the team leader learned from that, and the person learned from that. So what our goal of the exceptional differences is really to help people become exceptional engineers and exceptional leaders. Many of the people I've worked with have been good managers. They react early to situations. They deal with the problems personally. And they often remove the troublesome people or somehow immediately stop the behavior. What they miss, though, is something important. When I interviewed people for leading the Unleadable, the first edition, I talked to a lot of executives, and a lot of the executives said they should have fired a person sooner. But when I dug deeper, it was they missed a lot of opportunities to coach them sooner. So what I find exceptional leaders do is they react with the right timing to make a positive difference. And what they're working on is enabling team members to bring the troublesome people into harmony. More than once, the great exceptional leaders, the team members bring the other person back into harmony before the team leader ever has to intervene. And the team leader is actually tracking how often they can transform the troublesome to the tremendous. And what they do, and I talk about this in the last half of the book, is how do you set up your work environment for prevention? How do you create great expectations of excellence? How do you create great systems where people are going to be working within your system and the best traits of Maverick, Cynics, and Divas come forward and they do not cross that red line? I would like to take questions or comments now.
Thank you, Alan. That was a very great, really informative presentation. I really liked the chart there where you went through the four sort of examples of remove, earn, improve. Someone had a question while you were doing that, so I think that's what they were referring to. They asked where would a denialist fit in?
I'm not sure quite what they mean, but I think how so if you're talking about a leader that's a denialist, this is where I see a lot of times. If you have a leader that's ignoring the problem statements, I really believe you have an obligation to talk to the leader. For example, one of the young women engineers I worked with in the exceptional engineering experience, there was a number of meetings that her manager above her, 2 levels above her, that she thought were excruciatingly soul-suckingly bad. And I said, have you given that feedback? She said, he's 2 levels up. I said, I haven't. Just go in there. And she went in and said, hey, I really don't think I understand this meeting very well, because when I leave it, I'm confused. I've lost energy. And I don't know. Is it me? What's your goal here? And the guy said, I've been actually struggling with this meeting, and I don't know if people like it or not. I inherited this meeting, the guy said. I inherited this from somebody else, and I've been holding it because I thought the whole group wanted it. And so he worked with the one person on the team to get everybody else's feedback, and they ended up canceling the meeting. So you never know what's really going on. If you see something going on and you think your leaders, for example, is in denial, you have to bring them out of denial. Another denialist could be, I've had people miss a lot of commitments before and they didn't believe they did. So we actually had to work to get them a system so they could track it, so they could get their own data and see the results. So I think I answered that question. I just see one. What about the uncoachables? The uncoachables comes back to that chart I showed you. If they cannot take, if you give, first I got to say this: when you're giving feedback, if 80% of the time your feedback isn't working, it is you. It is you. If it's 80% of the time your feedback is working, then the 20% of the time that it's not, it's the other person. So if they're uncoachable, think to yourself, how many times have you been successful coaching people? If this one person stands out as unique and uncoachable, the problem is almost certainly them. And you'll probably have to look at the remove or improve chart. Okay, Scott, more questions?
Yeah. I think you covered this, but we'll stick in the denial category. I think you just sort of answered this, but what can we do if the employee denies that there is a problem?
It throws it back. That's very good. It's not me, it's you. You got really, I got to come back to the obligations of leadership. If you're the leader and this is happening, you have a responsibility to really look at removing the person from the situation. I actually had this recently on a volunteer team where the person had caused multiple people to quit, and you can't afford that on volunteer teams. So it was a very difficult situation, and this person very much was a denialist, and we still removed him from the team, and things got better again. You just have to do the hard thing when that's happening. Okay, Scott, you got more?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me find another one. This was from Rec. How do you know how let's see. Sorry, this is sort of a long one. I'm trying to sparse through it.
Okay, hey, I see one I'm interested in.
Okay.
Well, you do parse through that one. Your model assumes that people are willing to be supportive of other people trying to do. How does this work in an organization where people don't have an incentive to help others? For example, suppose an organization is going to be a downside and people know it. If you want to be a survival, you don't want to help others improve the performance of others. Okay, that's a very challenging one. I'm just going to give you my perspective. My perspective is I think we have an obligation to do good in the world. And I would encourage people to help others. The karma comes back and helps you. And I believe the people that help others the most are the most likely people to be kept in the organization. They're less likely to be laid off. And if even they are laid off, they're more likely to be hired again by the next because they really, the karma does count. That is my belief. Okay, what do you got, Scott?
I think you talked about this in your presentation, but what if the difficult one is above you in your org?
I talked about this briefly. I really do believe you have an obligation to talk to them in the same framework, the same thing. You do not have a position of authority, but you do have the ability to speak the truth that you see. And you really want to be clear about, I like the sandwich. You're clear about, you care about the person, that you want the best for them. You want the best for the mission. If you're talking about the mission and the value of the mission and the trouble you see, they're most likely to listen to you. And one thing I didn't talk about, I talked about in the book, is the Red Cross rule. What I learned in the Red Cross is if somebody is choking, the first thing you do is ask if they want help. Because if they don't want help, you're more likely to harm them than help them. So give the feedback and ask if they want help. What I have found is people that have done this have usually gotten a much better relationship with their managers, the difficult ones, and they help them. When you find out that you can't help them, they don't want help, what I have to say is this: the grass is greenest where you water it, but there is rocky ground. If you are on rocky ground and you do not believe you can improve the situation, you may have to choose to remove yourself from the situation.
That sounds
Scott,
very good advice.
Go ahead.
What if you have a leader who is a reactive one, good manager, but wants to be an exceptional leader? I think they're asking
I encourage them
how do they move from the one to the next?
Yes. I think we should do another talk on that one, Scott. But I'll give a short answer. The short answer is I would love people to take the exceptional engineering experience with us. We've transformed a lot of good engineers and good leaders into exceptional. It's a whole mindset shift, and it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder because what you're really learning how to do is how to get a much better view of reality all the time, how to accept reality, and some very good techniques to deal with reality. That's a really short answer to that, and I would love for you to. We're putting in the chat a link of how you can get hold of me, and you can get a free book, by the way, if you're interested. First 10 get a free book. If you're in continental USA, I'll sign it and ship it right out to you. So, how many more questions can we take?
I guess, when talking about the talking, like bringing up an issue with someone above you, that's sort of, someone says that sort of falls under the comment of the art of managing up. Any sort of quick tips on how to manage up, for lack of a better question? That's probably the whole beast in itself, but
yeah, it is. But I will note, really, the parts of this that we covered, there's some nuances. I just got a question about the EU people. please put your name and address in there, and I'll see how much it costs to get it to you. I have just found that sometimes it's so expensive to mail it overseas that it's not worth it. So, okay, when you're managing up, start with the obligations of engineering. A lot of times people want to give feedback. They don't start with why it's so important to the organization. Here's why I'm upset. This is impacting the whole group. It's affecting our revenue. And I see that we need to act on this. What is your view on this? Start with that. You know, it just, you want to really work on understanding what the impact is to the overall, have a belief that the manager is trying to do the best thing for the group, and they may have information you do not have. So a lot of times managing up is asking questions and giving feedback of information they might not have available to them. Like the person that said, hey, this meeting isn't working for me. She didn't say it was bad. It wasn't saying that the person was bad. It isn't working for me, which led to the whole meeting being canceled.
Excellent. Great advice there. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Do you have any closing thought or way you want to wrap up before we end the event?
Yes, I would love to. So again, you can get free stuff, and I love talking to people. So if you have more questions, feel free to write to me. The bottom line is, and I put this thread throughout the thing, what I find that one of the core things about exceptional leadership is really based on really a belief that people need to do good in the world, and a belief that we can work together to achieve many what was thought to be impossible things. So I encourage people to have faith in each other and to go out there and do good in the world. Thank you very much, Scott.
All right, thank you, Alan. Thank you for your great presentation, your great insights and tips, and your very thoughtful answers to the Q&A session we just had. And thank you, everyone, for attending and all of your thoughtful questions submitted today. Just a quick programming note before we wrap up. We have a few webinars coming up over the next few weeks. We have our next one is on May 14th, Adaptive Management Principles and Their Application to Cloud Computing. 2 days later, on the 16th, we'll have the intersection of AI and project management. And then on June 11th, we'll have a webinar titled New and Evolving Standards for Ethernet for Building and Industrial Automation. You'll get links to register in the email that you'll receive with the slides in this recording. You can also scan the QR code you see on your screen to register right now, I guess. Again, I would thank Alan for sharing his great insights with us today, and all of you for joining us again. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.